Supergirl is facing a much bigger problem than a disappointing box office run, and now the fallout may be reaching the people behind the entire DC universe. As the debate around the movie continues, several members of the DC team are pushing back against the criticism, while fans are pointing to one very uncomfortable comparison: Spider-Man Brand New Day, reportedly dominating at the box office while Supergirl struggles to find its audience. And now, with reports and claims about layoffs at Warner Brothers and DC Studios circulating, the pressure on James Gunn, David Zaslav, and the rest of the leadership team is only getting greater. But what exactly is happening behind the scenes, and why are people connected to Supergirl blaming fandom culture instead of the movie's performance? We're breaking all of that down today. And if you enjoy Hollywood and DC coverage, make sure to subscribe to the WokeWatch so you don't miss the next update. The situation surrounding Supergirl continues to become more complicated. According to the narrative being pushed by people connected to the project, the movie's problems aren't simply being blamed on its theatrical performance. Instead, the discussion has increasingly shifted toward online criticism, fandom culture, social media outrage, and what the filmmakers describe as sexist or misogynistic attacks. James Gunn has made similar arguments in his defense of the project, and now Millie Alcock is reportedly taking a comparable position. But there's another issue that makes the situation particularly interesting: the alleged layoffs and restructuring taking place around Warner Brothers and DC. The script's claims suggest that Warner Brothers leadership, including David Zaslav and other executives, has been making significant cost-cutting decisions following disappointing results from major projects. And if these changes continue to affect DC Studios, they could eventually have consequences for the larger DCU slate. That is why this isn't simply about one movie anymore. It's about whether the current strategy under James Gunn and Peter Safran is actually working, and whether Warner Brothers still has confidence in the direction of the franchise. Millie Alcock has now entered the conversation in a much more direct way. In the comments presented in the original discussion, Alcock argues that spending time in Hollywood has taught her that studio politics can heavily influence creative decisions. She claims that social media outrage can sometimes create so much pressure that executives and producers lose sight of the people actually making the projects. She also argues that hundreds of people worked extremely hard on Supergirl, only for the movie to become the subject of ridicule across social media and mainstream entertainment coverage. And then she brings up the elephant in the room. According to Alcock's argument, comparing the performance of Supergirl with the success of Spider-Man isn't necessarily fair because the two movies have completely different circumstances, and, most importantly from her perspective, different lead characters. She argues that the success of a male-led superhero movie doesn't automatically prove that the superhero genre itself is healthy, nor does it automatically explain why a female-led superhero movie struggled. Alcock also maintains that the negative reaction towards Supergirl was heavily influenced by what she describes as toxic fandom culture. And this is where the debate becomes much more complicated, because there is absolutely a legitimate discussion to be had about harassment and abusive behavior online. Nobody should be subjected to personal attacks simply because they worked on a movie. But that is completely different from saying that all criticism of Supergirl came from misogyny or toxic fandom. Those are two very different things. A viewer can dislike the screenplay, a viewer can dislike the performances, a viewer can dislike the direction, a viewer can think the marketing was ineffective, and none of those opinions automatically have anything to do with sexism. What's especially interesting is the timing of these comments. The DC Universe is moving forward with an increasingly crowded slate of projects. We've already seen Superman, while the franchise also has Supergirl, Lanterns, Clayface, Man of Tomorrow, Wonder Woman, and other projects in development or discussion, including projects connected to the wider Superman family. And that leads to an obvious question. Is DC trying to move too quickly? The new universe is still establishing its identity, yet audiences are already being introduced to multiple characters, different genres, and potentially very different tones. That could eventually become a problem for casual viewers. The MCU spent years building a connected universe and gradually introducing audiences to its characters. DC, under Gunn and Safran, appears to be attempting to establish multiple parts of its universe relatively quickly. The strategy could work, but it also creates a major risk. If every project has a completely different tone, style, and audience, casual viewers may have trouble understanding what the overall identity of the DCU actually is. And after the problems surrounding Supergirl, that's something DC leadership needs to think about very carefully. This is where I think the argument from the Supergirl team deserves some serious scrutiny. If Warner Brothers is cutting jobs or restructuring departments, blaming ordinary fans for those decisions doesn't really explain what is happening inside the company. Studios make financial decisions based on budgets, revenue, forecasts, future projects, and business performance. And Supergirl isn't operating in a vacuum. Warner Brothers has already experienced other major disappointments, including The Flash in 2023. So, if executives are reducing costs now, the bigger picture matters. Some people have even argued that the wrong employees are being affected. The original discussion points toward cuts involving marketing personnel and now potentially editors, animators, artists, and smaller performers who may have been expected to return for future DC-related projects. If those claims are accurate, then it's understandable why people working in those areas would be frustrated. But at the same time, it would be difficult to argue that ordinary moviegoers are responsible for a studio's internal financial decisions. Audiences can decide whether they want to buy a ticket. They can decide whether they liked a movie. They can criticize it. But the responsibility for budgets, marketing strategies, hiring, production decisions, and greenlighting projects ultimately belongs to the studio itself. Then we get back to Spider-Man. According to the figures being discussed in this story, Spider-Man Brand New Day has reportedly achieved an enormous worldwide box office result. And that's exactly why the comparison keeps coming back. It's not necessarily about saying Spider-Man versus Supergirl. The more important question is what the two performances could potentially tell us about the current superhero market. If audiences are supposedly tired of superhero movies, then why are certain superhero releases still capable of generating enormous theatrical interest? That doesn't automatically mean every superhero film should succeed. A movie can fail for countless reasons, but it does challenge the idea that superhero fatigue alone explains every underperforming superhero project. And that's why comparing different releases can actually be useful, as long as the comparison is based on more than the gender of the lead character. Marketing matters. Characters matter, storytelling matters, audience interest matters, brand recognition matters, and perhaps most importantly, the movie itself matters. This may ultimately be the biggest question. The DCU doesn't necessarily need to copy Marvel. It doesn't need every movie to feel identical, but it does need to establish a clear identity that audiences can understand. If one movie is extremely comedic, another is dark and serious, another feels like a completely different genre, and all of them are released in rapid succession, the casual audience may eventually struggle to understand what they're supposed to expect from a DC movie. That doesn't mean every project needs the same tone. It means the overall universe needs consistency in its quality and storytelling. And that's where James Gunn and Peter Safran have an enormous challenge ahead of them. Superman was supposed to establish the foundation. Supergirl was supposed to expand that universe. Man of Tomorrow will continue developing the Superman side of the franchise. And several other projects are waiting behind them. So the question isn't simply whether Supergirl succeeds or fails. The real question is whether Warner Brothers can learn from whatever went wrong and make the next wave of DC projects stronger. Because if the studio continues making the same mistakes, the backlash won't simply disappear because people are told that fandom culture is toxic. Audiences ultimately vote with their wallets, and if they believe a movie is worth seeing, they'll show up. If they don't, no amount of online arguments can completely change that. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think the criticism surrounding Supergirl has been unfairly focused on sexism and fandom culture, or do you believe those issues genuinely played a major role in the movie's reception? And what do you think DC needs to change before Man of Tomorrow arrives? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the WokeWatch for more Hollywood, DC, Marvel, and entertainment news. I'll see you in the next one.